It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Show's impossible, only possible due to our sponsors, cartking.com. That's cart-king.com, 877-986-7771. If you want to get into the mobile cart or kiosk business, you go to cart-king.com. You check out which kind of design applies to your business. They'll custom design it for you, custom build it for you, then ship it worldwide. Pure Soap Flake Company, that's puresoapflake.com. Give them a call at 218-568-2525. 218-568-2525. Puresoapflakes.com. Check out the, what do you call it? What I got there? Bathe your body and wash your clothes in Pure Soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. I got to tell you myself, I've been putting this, using my towels and my T-shirts and stuff like that, my clothing, and I got to tell you, man, I'm really noticing a difference. I can definitely give it an endorsement to Pure Soap Flake Company. AlmightyGold.com. Gold! Well, invest in gold, right? You don't have $1,000 to invest in gold. So you go to AlmightyGold.com. You can invest in gold for as little as 1/10 of a gram, 1 gram, 2.5 grams, 5 grams. No minimum purchase required. AlmightyGold.com. You can get into the gold business and become an affiliate of AlmightyGold.com. Ooh. So all kinds of good stuff like that. And what was the other thing too? Oh, they got a cryptocurrency backed in gold. What else is left after this? My sponsors. I think one more. Emailrevealer.com. Adoption investigations, infidelity investigations, email tracing, locates, all kinds of fun stuff. Asset searches, locate place of employment, infidelity investigations. Emailrevealer.com. And don't forget, if you like the show, check out OppermanReport.com. That's where we have our members section and a ton of great content that you won't find on free Friday nights or Saturday nights. Okay, our first guest today is Jenny Murray, and she's the filmmaker behind this excellent film, Las Sandinistas. And the website is LasSandinistas.com, and you can find the film right now. It's on Amazon. It's going to be on Amazon Prime in June. PBS is going to be broadcasting this on PBS Broadcast World Sunday, June 16th at 10 p.m. Eastern. So keep an eye out for that. It's on Doc World. Jenny Murray, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey,
thank you for having me.
No, thank you, man. Thank you so much. Because like I said, there was not a dry eye in the house when we saw this film at the Las Vegas Film Festival or at the Inspire Theater on Fremont Street. Everyone loved this film.
Oh, thank you so much. That is really wonderful to hear. I really appreciate it.
Tell us about yourself, because Jenny Murray. Who is Jenny Murray?
Mm-hmm. So this is my first feature film and my first documentary as well. And I was born in Chicago. I went to college in New York City, and that's where I got exposed to film. And for the first time realized maybe I could make my own film. I had a lot of creative friends there and studied Latin American film and Latin American literature and history in college and photography. And after graduating and working a number of day jobs, I worked for Macy's, I worked on a stock trading desk. I usually had 2 or 3 jobs. I grew up in a family that really struggled with money. My parents were born into working class Irish families on the south side of Chicago and worked their whole lives so that we could kind of get an education. And my parents died very young. My dad died the year before I made this film. He died the year I started researching it, and I left my job in finance. I was a licensed stock trading broker. I was licensed to trade, and at that moment, there was a big turning point in my own life. You know, our house was foreclosed on in Chicago. My dad worked his whole life, and he died in debt. He was very young, and I was searching also for different kinds of female role models, you know, for different ways that women could exist, not just in empowering ways, also in more easy and fun ways. And these women, the way that they lived was so exciting to me. It was really electrifying, and I felt that they were very alive. I found these interviews when I was debating going to visit a friend working on the border of Nicaragua and Costa Rica. And I'd studied a little of the revolution. I knew a little about it in the Contra War, but I never knew about these women. And I thought that was really weird in a lot of the accounts that they were missing. And even someone with, some education in it, like I was lucky enough to have, I didn't know. And since talking to more people, I think, since, growing with the project, even a lot of Solidarity people didn't know that women fought in the U.S., people that had really worked to support Nicaragua. Like you had told me you had in New York, a lot of people in the 80s. A woman called me crying who had done a lot of Solidarity work and said, I can't believe I didn't know. And that's how I felt. When I saw those stories, it was like a light went off. And I just couldn't believe these stories weren't really a big part of history. And that as a woman, I really needed to see women not only leading battle, like you see in a Captain Marvel movie, but, leading social reform, creating a new world with volunteers, not obsessed with money, but in a way that was really obsessed with helping the large majority of human beings whose lives were not adequately cared for in the society and by the society. And I thought that was just incredible. So I was moved. I was deeply moved, and it really helped me at a hard point in my life after my dad's death. The story really gave me something that I thought the world could use.
I'm so sorry to hear about the loss of your dad. I really, that's heartbreaking. I'm so sorry to hear that. He would have been so proud of this film because it really is it's a masterpiece. It really, really is. And I'm so impressed with this. One thing that really impressed me too was how you captured in these women the dignity, their passion. They're just these women were so impressive. Did you find that as well when you were there filming with them?
Yes. I was blown away by them. I was blown away in the first interview that I found online that encouraged me to go down with Sofia Montenegro. She was just she could quote philosophy, quote obscure political history. And these are people that grew up without books, with censorship, without access to books. And they were smarter than a lot of the friends I went to college with. It felt like, that they knew more and that they were really funny and really strong. And even today, being in their presence, it was incredible. I felt like they thought so creatively with such great imagination, and they were so funny and fierce, really. To be in their presence, you felt something in that room still, in late middle age. It was really awesome.
Yeah, I guess because they had lived through combat, and then they prevailed. They gave them a certain confidence, to yeah.
Yeah, there's a fearlessness, really, in the way that they live. And that I thought, especially in women's lives, it's not something we talk about as much. But I do think there are elements of their lives that a lot of women share. Certainly, I'm a white Irish girl from Chicago. There's no reason on paper I should make this film, but really, I looked up to them, and it was incredible. And meeting them was even crazier than I thought it would be. I mean, they were just more impressive and more, just incredible presences than I'd even imagined.
Yeah, now, what made you get involved with Latin American film?
In college, it was one of the best courses offered. It was that simple. And the teacher was a man named Richard Pena, who had been the head of Lincoln Center, New York, and he was a great teacher. So I really fought hard to be in that class because it was the coolest film class on offer. And I thought, when am I ever going to get to see these films again? Some of them you couldn't even access then.
You're right.
And and so it was a life-changing class for me. And I worked so hard at it, even though it wasn't my major. I was lucky to have a college where you didn't have to have a major. So that really changed my life. There was such a richness in the storytelling from the continent, I think, and from, a lot of the areas in and around Latin America. And it was unique. There was a kind of magic, and not to be too cliche, but there was something really, really vivid about those stories. And it got me fascinated. I started reading, Garcia Marquez, who also wrote about the National Palace. I found an interview with him and Dora Maria. So it all kind of intertwined. It was really, as I started doing that research about the film, I couldn't believe all the things that popped up that I'd studied in one way or another.
Now, how did you come across, because there's a lot of archival footage in this film that's really quality footage to begin with. How'd you get all of that?
Yeah, that was a multi-year process. Some was easier to get than others. Some were, some of the really beautiful film archives were other filmmakers from either the U.S. or Mexico or Costa Rica and Nicaragua that were there in the late 70s and early 80s with equipment, with these giant cameras filming. And So some of them, I stalked. I would just email over and over or call. And some were just really kind and really generous. There's a professor named Jonathan Buxbaum who wrote a great a book about film in the Sandinista movement called, it was about the history of the FSLN and cinema. And he was just the loveliest person, and had old newsreels that he shared with us and some of the older films that he made DVD rips of. And yeah, there were a number of Susan Meiselas, the incredible photographer and legendary filmmaker and artist. She was down there in the 70s and 80s. Her photos blew me away then, and they still do now. They're incredible works of art. And they were, the closest up, just vivid photos of revolutionary combat. So she was very generous with us, connected me to other filmmakers. She allowed me to use some of her prints in very, very generous ways. Other people were harder to access, I should say. And it took a long time to get some of the copies of things. It took a lot of work. We didn't have an archivist, I should say that too. We were self-funded, so we raised money from the internet to make this film. I mean, I used all my life savings and then internet, whatever we could get. So it wasn't like we had a budget initially. Eventually, ITVS came on as a co-producer after we had a rough cut of the film. And then we had some budget. So then we were able to access CBS archives. We had an archival lawyer who helped us fair use as much as we could. And it was, a handmade, multi-year process to get most of this.
And now that it's winning awards, you must feel this is a great success.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I think especially with where we came from and knowing that it was largely a one-person project for 5 years, it's an incredible honor that we're winning, awards, and that the film has this life. A woman pulled me aside. I was at an inner city school in Baltimore, and she said, this film has legs. And she really wanted me to know that. She's like, people will continue to watch it. And that meant so much to me, really making this film. Sometimes you didn't even know if anyone was ever going to see it, editing in my little living room. So it was amazing. This is amazing that it's being seen. And it's in Las Vegas. I mean, how incredible that people in Las Vegas get to see this film. It's just amazing. It
was very well received, too. Like I told you, everyone was just stunned. At the end of this movie, you just sit there. Yeah, and these are all like-minded people, all in support of the revolution. They're all good people, No, what about that now? Because now you've made a serious leftist movie, Are you concerned about being blacklisted now from future projects?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something I thought about a little bit, but not too deeply. And I think, my dad, who died, would have been a Trump supporter. And I grew up in a house that was very divided. My mom was a Democrat. And I think in her own way, a feminist, and she had her own company, and they fought about politics and fought about everything when I was growing up. And, I think my brothers are still conservative. And so I feel like I'm also from a very divided American family. And, at some point with a certain amount of tragedy maybe too, I felt kind of a fearlessness about it. And I thought, no, I'm going to die doing things I believe in. Having worked at corporate jobs, many, and really found an element of misery in that. To some degree, jobs I didn't really believe in, and a system that I no longer, there were a number of things I thought were insupportable about it. I do believe healthcare is a human right. And I do believe, that everyone should have access to education through college. And I don't believe you should have to go into jobs that you hate to pay for that, or into massive debt to get a basic education. I do not believe that in the richest country in America, on earth, living in America as we do now. So I was willing to make a film that, is risky and that might be dangerous. But I also believed in it. And so I was willing to go and do what I had to do.
And I guess you had to make trips down to Nicaragua.
Yeah. And I love Nicaragua, so that was a joy initially. And we ended up going a number of times. And it's always a joy. The country is a magical, incredible country. And it ended, working in Nicaragua is very different than working in the United States. Getting things done and hiring, we had a crew that was largely Nicaraguan. So I'd say the majority of people on our crew were Nicaraguan. And, yeah, it's a special country, and I was really honored to work there and to learn a different way. You know, it functioned very different than any film set in the United States I've ever been on. And I think that's a good thing. I think that helped me grow as someone who works in film, to see how people do it in different countries, to adapt. And yeah, and it's really a beautiful country. So getting to film B-roll there is a privilege. It's incredible. The volcanoes, the mountains, the oceans, you know, the mists in the hills. You know, it's just incredible dawns, incredible sunsets.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
People.
Some of the cinematography of the mountains and the lush forest, the greenery and stuff like that is just incredible. But, you know, we kind of got off right into the minutia of filmmaking without describing this film and what it's about. Why don't you give us an idea of what was the Nicaraguan Revolution? Why did these people want a revolt against this Somoza? Give us an idea.
Yes. So there had been a dictatorship in Nicaragua. The Somoza family they were in power for about 40 years. And, so it was a long, multi-decade dictatorship. And the film opens in the chapter of kind of the U.S. Marines coming and occupying Nicaragua in the early part of the 20th century. And then, the first Somoza kind of coming to power, and also having worked with the Marines and having been trained, by U.S. intervention in the country. And, having spoken English well, he was a clear favorite. And, eventually he overthrew the sitting president of Nicaragua and then assassinated Sandino. Sandino is this mythic figure. And we didn't have enough time in the course of one small feature to talk about Sandino, but obviously he was a figure of heroic resistance to U.S. intervention and imperialism and really defended the people. And so the Sandinistas were a lot of largely young people, leftists that really believed in a program of anti-poverty in a country that was very impoverished like Nicaragua. And they had an anti-imperialist stance. They were against U.S. intervention and really wanted to overthrow a dictatorship that at that point had become very violent, by the late 60s and early 70s. And very repressive towards its own population, including civilians, young women and children, especially the poor in the countryside that had the least defenses, and had a huge National Guard. So the Sandinistas began as a group of young people that were training underground with, homemade weapons and, a few kind of non-military grade weapons at the beginning, and small bands, small groups, in great danger. And a lot of them came out of the student movements of the late 60s and early 70s in Nicaragua. A lot of them were either in the Christian liberation theology movements. Some were very, very Catholic, which is really interesting, and it seems kind of contradictory to us. But many were really moved into battle by their faith. And that was very common in Latin America at that time. Even priests and nuns were on the front lines. It's incredible to think about. And a lot were just student activists that really believed that hospital workers and, teachers should have better wages. So Dora Maria, for example, one of the lead characters, was someone who supported the workers' strikes as a high schooler. She was a leader for student movement. And when nonviolent protests, in the streets weren't doing anything, and when people started getting killed, a lot of these men and women, and especially young women in huge numbers, began to join. And they joined underground and began training.
I think one of the pivotal moments was the earthquake, right?
Yes, that was in 1972. It was a massive earthquake shook Managua and killed, estimates say 10,000 people, and some say more when you talk to Nicaraguans, which for a country with a population of around 3 million at that time is huge. It's a huge number of people. And they were killed, a lot of them instantaneously. Dora Maria said she was at a dance party and she saw the floor just shatter, and parts of the ground rise up and people just flung everywhere. And so that also in a country with as much poverty and as much disease as Nicaragua had, a lot of people were dying of diseases like diarrhea. Infant mortality was through the roof. People really had, I think the country was 50% illiterate. And so a lot of them were moved, I think, especially by what the earthquake did, which catapulted, these extremes of inequality to just intolerable levels, unsupportable levels for people that, like Dora Maria and Sofia and Joconda and Claudia, just really saw their families suffering already and the people of their country suffering in a way that just became, just insupportable. And so a lot of them joined at that moment. And some also joined. There was a socialist party. There was a communist party. A Maoist party. I mean, to think about that in that small of a country, they had so many parties on the left. You know, the FSLN wasn't even the only or the most popular during different times in the 60s, you know. So a lot of them eventually joined the FSLN because it seemed like the most likely party to topple the dictatorship.
And I guess the turning point of the revolution was, like you said before, the National Palace, the hostage situation over there.
Yes. Yeah, the National Palace was incredible, especially for women. You know, since the film is through the eyes of women and women's incredible participation and leadership of not only battle in the revolution, but social reform. The National Palace was when Dora Maria, you know, as a 22-year-old girl, essentially, or at that point she might have even been 21, it was 1978, and she was appointed Commander 2 of this huge operation to hold Somoza's Congress hostage, you know, right in the middle of the afternoon. And so she and a commando of, you know, a handful of young people, led by Eden Pastora, who also was a hero of the revolution and later a Contra. But she was appointed number 1, and Dora was Commander 0, he was called, and Dora was Commander 2. And they had planned for, I think, years. Eden said they had been pitching the idea of the palace for years. That's how much planning went into these things. But they dressed as National Guard members. So they were disguised as Somoza's own guard. And they got their hair shaved. And Dora Maria was the only girl that was going into the palace. Daisy Zamora, another wonderful character in the film, was there supporting and, you know, getting everyone ready for the palace. Although Dora Maria was the only one who went inside of the women featured in the film. And with a bunch of other young boys, many of whom she said had never even fired a weapon. And they were going to hold 2,000 people hostage and try to get a ransom. They were going to ask for $10 million and the release of all the political prisoners. At that point, there were a number of political prisoners, and then planes out of the country. And the palace was just, I mean, it's incredible. And the palace itself is like an action movie. I mean, yeah, so all these people were taken hostage, and they did a great job. It's the thing that they went in and they thought they were National Guard members, and Dora Maria led a squad inside, and they watched the front door. And shooting began as soon as they realized that they weren't. You know, obviously they had to find the high-value targets inside, relatives of Somoza, you know, very wealthy members. You know, that obviously if they held them hostage, they knew they had a bargaining power. So they went in and secured the doors, let pregnant women and children out. They let the Red Cross in. You know, a lot of people were making coffee, I've heard, in some of the accounts that I read. So it was an interesting atmosphere inside, but Somoza basically didn't take them seriously and more or less dismissed their demands. And so the guerrillas, you know, were exhausted. I think some of them were falling asleep, yet they have to have their weapons in their hand and manage, you know, so many people. And, yeah, so, I mean, eventually after a few days inside, they were able to do it. Somoza realized that they had basically sent him this ultimatum. Within 4 hours, if we don't get our demands met, then we're going to start killing people. And they were serious, you know, and that's, you know, from a moral standpoint, it's extremely complicated, you know. And I think when the movie tries not to take a side about this because it's an extremely complicated situation. And, you know, a lot of people may disagree with the stance that the Sandinistas took. And, you know, it's complicated. And so, but Somoza wrote back and eventually did, a few hours later, acquiesce to their demands. And so they didn't have to start executing prisoners. And they left, you know, with basically a ransom and most of their demands met and the freedom of the political prisoners.
And Daniel Ortega was one of those prisoners that was released.
He was released in the Castillo raid, which was in 1974, which was a dinner party at the U.S. ambassador's house. Or, sorry, at Somoza Minister Chema Castillo's house. But it had been a party for the U.S. ambassador right around Christmas. So he was released then, and then had sort of, he and his brother Umberto started, I think, gathering power and gathering a kind of respect within the party that they built up through 76 when Carlos Fonseca, who was one of the original founders and the beloved leader, was killed.
So the focus of the movie is then after how these women led these actions, you know, again, like you said, with very little training, and they even talk about how, well, we were being shot at, so we were just shooting back. We just wanted to survive this little battle and just move on to it's just so beautiful the way they tell these stories. But then when the revolution was successful, all these women were kind of shunned aside and just kind of, okay, go make the coffee, right? Isn't that what happened?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. So a lot of them were real heroes on the battlefield.
Oh, yeah.
It was incredible. And, some of them even had children. And there's a picture of Monica Boltodano, who took the city of Granada, who's a famous commander, fully pregnant, leading a battalion, saluting. And, yeah, so these women really masterminded. Dora Maria masterminded the first city that fell, Leon, that turned the entire war around. And, again, as a very young person, it's like a college-aged kid, by our standards, and led hundreds of people to take that city. And that was the turning point, again, of the war, after many of her closest friends had just been killed, by the way, which is another incredible thing. The Guard had ambushed the other leadership of Leon, so she was left essentially alone in charge of a whole front of the army. And came up with a strategy where she, took over the airport, blew up the roads, really just this really brilliant strategy. So these women, even women like Daisy, who had been a student activist and came without much training and really trained with grenades, trained with, handguns, rocket launchers. She's this very delicate poet is what she looks like. And then the reality is that she's, shooting a machine gun behind a bush in battle within a few months. And a lot of them, again, gave birth, and then sometimes within their, even after they, one day shoot a machine gun, they'd be expected to do the dishes that night and clean up after the other men. And Daisy couldn't really, especially women like Daisy that were lucky to have, a fair amount of education, saw how insane that was, to the double standard of being expected to be, leading battle, and then at the same time doing the laundry that same night for the people doing the exact same work as them on the battlefield. And that was something I think, were never able to live down. I think they all hoped, because they had worked so hard, I think they just assumed they'd be in leadership positions naturally for all that they had done after the victory. And unfortunately, those little instances, like you pointed out, having to cook or clean in the army became, after the victory, something that ended up not just being a little issue, it ended up becoming a large, sadly, kind of archetypal issue that ended up destroying a lot of the advances that they had made during the war.
Yeah, they even talk about how if you had a relationship with one of the men who was a leader, that you would have more power, and more influence, and be taken more seriously.
Yes, and Dora Maria says, she sums that up, and Daisy describes it really beautifully. Dora Maria says, sadly, a lot of women's role, even in the war itself, and then later, in the revolutionary government, mimicked women's role in Nicaraguan society. And so Daisy explains, in that sense, if you were related to a powerful male figure, then you could essentially be protected. That could function as a safety net. And so a lot of these really talented, independent women, that were otherwise maybe in really dangerous situations or maybe being approached in certain ways by other leaders, if they were attached to one of the comandantes, then they were safe. And Daisy said that always repulsed her, that she thought we were trying to change this whole world, including these backwards standards, for having to be, as a woman, protected or attached to some man in order to be safe or to be seen as powerful. And yeah, so some of the women were just really, really, I think, saddened and disgusted by that reality. But a lot of the men would kind of try to take advantage of it, from the anecdotes that I heard from these women. And yeah, I think that is something a lot of them fought to change, but it wasn't easy. And I should say too, there were nice men like Carlos Nunez, I think his name was, and a number of the comandantes that people said were, actually very forward-thinking. Some of them were with some of the women that were very forward-thinking, and some of them were really nice. I don't think their intentions were necessarily bad, but I think the society had this standard, and unfortunately the revolution wasn't able to overturn, every single man and every single standard, even though the women worked really hard to do it.
There's just a fascinating perspective of the film to choose that, this feminist, perspective of this revolutionary war, And then we'll get into, when we come back from the commercial break, on how things turned out till today, that these women are still fighting for their rights and for their equal rights. We'll be right back with more of Jenny Murray. We're talking about her excellent film called Las Sandinistas. The website is lassandinistas.com. You can check this out. It's going to be on PBS, Sunday, June 16th, 10 p.m. Eastern, WGBH, on Doc World. You can find it on Amazon right now, but it's going to be on Amazon Prime in June. At the end of this, when I'm finished with Jenny, I'll read to you the whole. There's a whole bunch of screenings all over in Baltimore, where our friend John Potash is, in England. I've got a lot of listeners in England, so I'll try and read a lot of that to you there. And also, too, I want to talk about how people can support this film, too, and get it out there. So we'll be right back with more of Jenny Murray after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. AlmightyGold.com. Get your gold in affordable quantities. 1 gram, 2.5 grams, 5 grams, no minimum purchase required. Why save in paper when you can save in gold? AlmightyGold.com understands it's difficult to afford gold in large quantities. No one can afford an ounce of gold. This is why Almighty Gold has introduced to you Carat Bars, a most reliable company where you can buy gold in minor quantities from as little as 1/10 of a gram. That's like $6. Each gold bar is inset into the Carat Bar frame, which is a standard credit card size, and it's covered by a safety laminate. It's imprinted with a unique DNA for counterfeit protection and provided with a blacklight authenticity signature on the front. Gold, AlmightyGold.com. They have a cryptocurrency backed in gold, and you can become an affiliate at AlmightyGold.com and make a commission from any gold that is purchased from your affiliate link. It's contact us at almightygold.com. That's their email address. Contact us at almightygold.com. Gold! Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Maybe add new point-of-sale locations across the country quickly, or bring in revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services to your office building, warehouse, or lobby? CartKing.com is the answer to your needs. CartKing.com is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile retail, coffee, food carts, and kiosks that money can buy. For 20 years, CartKing.com has been working with clients across America to provide indoor and outdoor carts and kiosks for any application. That's www.cart-king.com. Give them a call at 877-986-7771. Tell them Ed Opperman sent you. So you go to the website, CartKing.com, you check out their different designs and models. You pick out which design applies to your business. They'll custom design it for you, custom build it for you, and ship it worldwide. CartKing.com. PureSoapFlakes.com. 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with pure soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. Order today at puresoapflakes.com, greenhome.com, amazon.com, or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with filmmaker, director, producer, writer Jenny Murray, who's made this incredible film, Las Sandinistas. It's lassandinistas.com, and you can check it out. It's going to be on PBS, so keep an eye out for that. Sunday, June 16th. It's on Amazon right now, but it's going to be on Amazon Prime in June. So, Jenny, after the overthrow of Somoza, we get Ortega. And your film touches on the leadership of Ortega. How would you describe it?
Well, so it was a very complex process, building this government with a bunch of really young people. You know, a lot of these revolutionaries were between 20 and 30 years old. And they took over their entire country, really. So it was in the hands of these very young, idealistic people. And Ortega had grown up poor and he'd been involved in the revolution, although many people have told me he wasn't a great leader in combat, compared to someone like Dora Maria, one of the characters in our film. However, he was a part of this national directorate that ended up coming to power in the very early 1980s. And so initially he was very idealistic and, really oversaw a lot of the, became an important person in the FSLN. And he really steered, a number of reforms, some of which I think were really successful, but also a lot of the women led the very successful reforms, I should say. Like the Ministry of Health was led by Leah Guido, which brought inoculations to, millions of people, and healthcare and preventative strategies, with volunteers that went to villages and taught people how to cover their water and how to prevent, food from going bad, and really just helped people in very basic ways. And Daisy led the Ministry of Culture, which really brought poetry and dance and literacy projects, teaching people who had just learned to read, with volunteers throughout the country how to write poems. It was an incredible, magical time. And Ortega, is a complicated figure, because obviously he did a lot of good things for the country, and, was a beloved figure in these early years especially. And really, at the same time, I think under Ortega's leadership, the country had a very complicated relationship with the United States, a very incendiary, reactive relationship. And they really said things that really upset the United States under Ronald Reagan, who had come into power in the United States right around the same time. And Reagan was obviously very anti-Sandinista and very anti-leftist and what they called communist governments anywhere in Latin America. So the U.S. had a number of programs, and in part because of Ortega's stance in foreign policy, the U.S. reacted in very strong ways. So Ortega, they quickly became a country that was under attack and very afraid for their existence as a new revolutionary government. The U.S. accused them of funneling weapons to El Salvador to encourage another revolution. It was the Cold War in the world. It's a really paranoid time. And the U.S. was extremely afraid of having communists, what they called communists, to the south, and having that spread throughout a region that historically had been under U.S. influence and power, with a number of different dictators. And the idea that revolution could spread was terrifying. And certainly the Ortega government, or the government, essentially of which Ortega was one of the main leaders, seemed to be a huge threat to the United States at that point. So, it became a really, really complicated time. And certainly the stance was one of extreme aggression and defense against the United States. And it seemed also, Ronald Reagan wasn't really willing to sit down and negotiate at a table with them, but, referred to them as Looney Tune characters. He really saw them and portrayed them in the media to be vile monsters, almost subhuman. And so, in the U.S. media, this became a huge scandal and controversy as Reagan was trying to drum up support to unseat the Ortega government and the Sandinistas to really destroy the revolution.
And did it appear that the Contras, the U.S.-backed CIA Contras, were more efficient and more organized and a more opposition than the original Somoza forces?
What's interesting is a lot of the Contra forces, which were supported by the United States, a lot of the main leaders, certainly initially, were ex-Somoza National Guardsmen.
Right.
So you essentially had a fighting force that was largely, a pro-Somoza fighting force. Some of the leaders had been in exile in Miami, some had flown to Washington, and, the United States was trying to support a very anti-revolutionary, anti-Sandinista fighting force to really take the country back into the hands of someone that was more like Somoza, that was willing to sit down and negotiate and do what the U.S. wanted, essentially. And Somoza had gone to West Point, you have these National Guardsmen that had been kind of brought up in a very U.S. militarized way. And they were organizing on the borders, in Honduras. They had a number of camps, and it became a very, very dangerous and devastating situation very quickly.
And there was the additional incentive that they were bringing cocaine up as well.
Yeah, there were a lot of really horrifying and incredibly unbelievable accounts of drug smuggling, of the CIA getting their hands on a ton of dirty dirty operations in order to fund the Contras illegally when it had become prohibited, by U.S. laws. Weapons for hostages in Iran. There were so many kind of crazy scenarios that the U.S. covertly got involved in order to fund this fighting force. That was essentially a secret covert operation. There was a CIA manual about killing Sandinistas, that was distributed. And, they recruited mercenaries from other countries to come and fight. And it became this huge covert operation. Yeah, drugs, you name it. It was just a really wild, and Eden Pastora, again, one of the leaders of the National Palace, a former Sandinista, had become a Contra leader in the South, in Costa Rica. People say he was involved in a number of these operations. It was a very, very complicated, extremely bizarre scenario.
But then somehow, there was an election, and Ortega was voted out. But then somehow Ortega comes back in, and there was some type of a compromise. There was some kind of a peace was established with the U.S. What went on there?
Yes, so the Contra War was, nearly a decade long.
Right.
And, tens of thousands of Nicaraguans are killed, by the way. And, the U.S., it becomes a scandal. Oliver North in the U.S. is put on trial. It's on TV. Are you illegally funding a war in Central America with U.S. funding? And it was a huge scandal. And so, so essentially, Ortega had been elected in '84. And some people dispute the legitimacy of the election, but so Ortega was essentially the leader, during the Contra War years, and then, the bloodshed. It just got to a point where there were elections. At the very end of the 80s. And people were so sick of the war. Nicaraguan mothers were tired of losing their children. Children were having to go and fight because, it was a tiny country. And in order to defend themselves from the U.S., they had to do extreme things. So, all these young men and women were dying after they had just fought a revolution. To imagine that, families still torn apart. All kinds of things had changed. And I think because people were really tired of it, essentially Violeta Chamorro, who, and some people still really look back at her election as a positive thing. It depends where you stand on the spectrum. But essentially people saw this woman, Violeta, who was the wife of a famous anti-Somoza journalist, Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, who was assassinated and who's, his killing was essentially one of the things that brought a lot of middle-class people against Somoza and really helped support the Sandinistas' rise to prominence in the country before the revolution. So she was a kind of neutral figure in a lot of ways, and she was an anti-war figure. People saw her as someone that would unite the country in peace because she could cooperate in different ways with the U.S. in a way that the Sandinistas were just unable or unwilling to. And so when the election came about, for the 1990 presidency, Violeta was essentially elected, I think, largely, and it was a shock to the Sandinistas. They couldn't believe, after all they had done, that this non-Sandinista figure was elected, but she was, and they respected that vote. Ortega said, to his credit, we're going to have a peaceful transition of power. She won, and we're going to transition, because these militarized people couldn't believe it. But essentially once I think the U.S. felt safe, they were willing to negotiate, and once Violeta was, a figure that they realized, and the Sandinistas would transition power to her, they were willing to negotiate to end the Contra War. And the Sandinistas, to their credit, were willing to negotiate too. Everyone wanted to stop the war at the end of the 80s. No one could stand it anymore, it felt like. And so, essentially when Violeta comes to power, they transition into a different government, and the Sandinistas are out. They're supposed to give back everything that they had and transition the whole country over. And, a lot of people, I think, were very grateful to just have a moment after all of that bloodshed, to try to start healing.
Now, your documentary doesn't touch on the allegations of Ortega being involved in the drug trade. Did you come across any of that?
Not directly. And, I felt also that, if it was a longer film or a longer series, we could have gotten into that more, because it is fascinating. But it felt like with the scope of one feature that I really wanted to focus on women's lives in the revolution. And, Yeah, so I didn't really include too much of that, and Ortega himself, I don't know enough about to really comment. But I can say that a lot of people. There was talk, and in my research it says there were a lot of people involved. So.
Well, it seems like everybody is everywhere you go. Like all the people, the guys who got the seat there. That's one of the things they did. Now, but there was an allegation that I had never heard before of a rape, an Ortega rape. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So Ortega's stepdaughter, Zoila America Navarez, who was his wife Rosario Murillo's daughter before they were married. So he sort of adopted her. And, there was this scandal in the 90s that really came, to the public in Nicaragua, that she made allegations that he had raped her and abused her for many, many years. And it was really serious. I mean, she wrote this 20-page report about it, which I've read, which is really graphic and really upsetting. And, essentially she asked for a trial for this to really be recognized and dealt with. And it was a huge scandal on some level. And essentially what happened was both Ortega and his wife Rosario, Zoila America's daughter, said it was a lie, and that Zoila America was lying, and that she was a traitor to the revolution. And essentially she's since been exiled, and she now lives in Costa Rica from her own country with her kids. There's an excellent documentary about it, a short documentary by Leonor Zuniga, who worked on our film as well, where she's with Zoila America now. It just premiered at Hot Docs. It's a great short documentary about Zoila America, but with her talking about what Ortega did to her, and then kind of witnessing what's happened to the country since she made those allegations in the 90s. And, Ortega essentially said he had immunity, that under the law he was protected. He didn't even have to respond or deal with it. And so essentially what they did was just kick her out of the country. And no one ever dealt with the fact that she brought these incredibly serious allegations of rape and sexual abuse against him.
Well, it seems like these women that you feature in the film, these heroines of the revolution, they all seem to endorse her accusations.
Yeah, a number of the women I spoke to, and a number of people that had worked inside the government did corroborate a number of the things that she said to me personally. So, a number of other journalists I've spoken to who interviewed Ortega about it and interviewed a number of other people, it seems quite credible. And obviously I'm not a lawyer representing her, so I'm not able to speculate further. But I certainly believe that if someone brings credible accusations of abuse, that should be dealt with. And to throw somebody out, especially when you're the leader of this progressive revolution and you're credibly accused of abuse and rape by your own stepdaughter, and then to just say that essentially you have immunity and to hide and call them a liar, I think this is absolutely unbelievable and a terrible thing to do, and sets a terrible example. So certainly Sophia said, if you have a president of a country accused of rape,
right,
what example does that set for the other men in the party? What does that say about the revolution itself when the leader of the revolution is accused of this extent of abuse? And a number of other women I talked to had similar things to say about Ortega. So I don't even think it was limited to his stepdaughter, from what I've heard, from the credible accusations of other women. And so that's where it gets very, very terrifying, that the extent of the abuse and the extent of permission, essentially, and impunity. Sophia called it a culture of impunity, where men can rape and kill. And if they're a member of the party, they're protected, essentially. They don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, power corrupts. Power corrupts on all sides. Now, these women, these heroines that you have in your film, now they seem to portray the Ortega government now as cronyism, and it has all these people in there, and they're all profiting. And they're speaking out against that. And these women are speaking. Now, by the way, too, and it also points out in the film, too, that these women are even honored in the local museums and the local history of their work in the revolution. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a very complicated situation in the sense that, so a lot of them actually, in the history, a lot of them are being erased as we speak. And, so to have it come to that extent, where a lot of these women who literally led some of the battles, the turning points, are essentially invisible
including to the people that they helped lead and fight with. So Ortega, one of the things that he's done since he's come back to power in 2006, I think, and his wife Rosario Murillo, who's now vice president, is essentially, at least according to the women in the film, sort of power grab, right? And stack the Supreme Court, stack the Congress, really essentially create their own army, a police force that's essentially beholden to them, no checks and balances. And so it's a really dangerous situation. And if people, they say, to their credit, the government says, we have half of the Congress are women and we're extremely progressive. But what does it mean if half the women are in Congress yet they can't speak or dissent or even question a policy? Or what gender representation, what does that matter? Essentially, one woman I heard was she abstained from the vote about the canal. She didn't even say no to this, policy that Ortega wanted. She just abstained and was fired immediately. Leticia Herrera was fired, a very loyal, devoted Supreme Court justice in 2014. She had been a commander in the revolution, and she published a memoir and was fired while we were filming in 2014. And she wouldn't speak, but I mean, the amount of, the people that they've thrown under the bus that were important figures of the revolution for decades and loyal members of their party. Essentially, as soon as they do something that they don't approve of, without any, again, checks or balances or due process of law, they're thrown out. And what is a government if you can just throw people out and it's extremely arbitrary and your friends, are stacking all of the branches of power? So that's sadly, it seems, where the country is today, and why so many of the women in the film are leading, hunger strikes for political freedom and, marching for democracy, marching for an end to this government. In light of the fact that at least when I started making the film, Ortega had, by some measures, by some polls, a 65% approval rating. I should say that he's helped with electricity, he's helped with roads. They have programs that help a number of Ortega loyalists in different communities. Really poor people have seen benefits. So I think Ortega's certainly smart. I think their strategy is intelligent, and they kept power for a long time that way. And behind the scenes, we're really concentrating all power in their hands while doing these gestures to make poor people feel very taken care of.
And then again, too, without consolidating power, against such great opposition, international opposition, you're going up against the whole United States government, and all the power of these international corporations. It's you have to, in some ways, you have to consolidate power, otherwise you'd be dead in the street. But now, what about you? When you're down there reporting on this kind of stuff here, did you feel any fear going up against the government?
Initially, we were concerned about that, and then luckily in 2014, these women, were able to talk, and so when we were filming, up until 2017, it felt very peaceful for the most part. There were protests, but, people weren't being killed in the streets. We did go film protests, and I was concerned, that we could get pulled into jail or the police would stop us or follow us, and some of our lead subjects were like, you have to be extremely careful, but we asked all the opposition leaders. We asked Ortega, we asked Rosario for interviews. We asked women in Congress that were loyal to the party for interviews. We asked Aminta Granera, the former head of police, for an interview. So we were very vocal about what we were doing. And luckily, I didn't ever feel in great danger at that time. I think if we tried to film now or, after the April 2018 explosion that happened in the country when Ortega had tried to change the pensions, and then people were getting killed in the streets just for protesting. I think if we went now, it would have been a disaster. I think we probably would have been thrown out of the country. Certainly many journalists have been since. There's a journalist killed. And with these women, the women in our film are living underground again. Dora Maria is on the terrorist list. She's living in clandestinity. Her house was raided. Sophia's, again, living in clandestinity, under house arrest. Sophia and Monica, I should say, just over a month ago, were pulled into jail, again, just for meeting on the street. The first time I think Sophia had left her house in months. They were pulled into jail just for meeting on the street to protest. So this is the kind of environment that's there now. And these women are scared for their lives, as they should be, and are taking extreme measures to even stay alive.
Jenny Murray, you're doing great work. You really are, and I can't thank you enough. You have an open invitation to come back here anytime you're promoting anything you want to do. Okay, for the rest of your life.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk, and thank you so much for your support and for the wonderful interview.
But I just wanted to ask you though, how can people support your work, and how can people support this film?
Thank you so much.
I take notes. I take notes.
It's a great question. People can go on IMDb and give the film a good rating if they support it and like it. That helps us a lot. And people can share on social media and really try to screen it in their communities. We organize screenings through our distributor, Kino Lorber. We're trying to screen at every school and in every community that we can. So you can reach out to us through our website to help plan it, and reach out through Estelle Grosso at Kino Lorber. And we'd love to keep showing the film and spreading the message. You can also support these women as they struggle online. Dora Maria and Sophia are very active on Facebook and Twitter. You can follow the hashtag SOS Nicaragua and Azul y Blanco. And you can find these movements online and support them when people are pulled into prison. You can help spread that word to free them, which we did when Sophia and Monica were pulled into prison. And it helps. So spreading the word is a huge, huge help in supporting an IMDb. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. And like I said, anytime you want to come back, anything you want to promote, just let me know.
Thank you so much. I'd love to.
Thank you. Okay, then we had Jenny Murray, and once again, this film is called Las Sandinistas. Okay, the website is called lassandinistas.com. You got to check this out. This is her first feature film. This is great work. There's a little trailer on there. You could find this film right now. It's on Amazon. It'll be on Amazon Prime coming up June 16th. I guess that's about it, right? 10 p.m. Eastern time on a PBS broadcast, Sunday, June 16th, and on PBS. Okay, but we just saw it out here at the Las Vegas Film Festival, and I got to tell you something, man. It's just a riveting film, and everybody you were crying at some point, but everybody in the audience was just moved by this film. It was excellent work. I can't, and it's the kind of thing too you can watch 2 or 3 times because there's just so much information and history involved in the film as well too. So Jenny Murray, man, keep an eye out for her. Okay, everyone else says, man, Opperman Report, we get them first, man. Okay, check out Knock Down the House, man, and you'll see Amy Villella on there. She was on this show here years ago before she was ever in Rolling Stone or anyone thought about running for office. And now she's in one of the biggest films and Knock Down the House. And by the way, too, you watch that film too, you'll see Vic's training, the scene where she's in the debate. Vic trained her for that debate, and the scene where we're talking about the opposition funding, stuff like that. Vic found all that information. This is, these are all our folks, man. But this film is Las Sandinistas, lassandinistas.com. Jenny Murray, excellent filmmaker. Keep an eye out for her. If you enjoyed today's show, check out OppermanReport.com. That's where we have our member section. And we need your support, too. We're going through some difficult times here. We just had a huge college fund stolen from us. And we're fighting, right now, even before I did this interview and after I do this interview, we're running down a family court. I'm trying to file an appeal just to delay this stuff going on my credit report so we can go out and borrow this college money for Victoria. We're going to be putting out a GoFundMe for her, specific just for her college funding. The kid's got a great future ahead of her. We can get her in there. But the way you support this show, keep it on the air, is our members section where we have excellent content. I just uploaded a new interview with the Montgomery Blair Sibley, and I uploaded the DC Madam, phone logs I have on there too. From Montgomery Blair Sibley. Excellent interview we did with him. And it brings up this guy, what's that guy, Lockman, Bachman, the guy was coming up with all that stuff about Seth Rich. Great stuff came out in that interview. It's in the member section. And then we have 3 hours on JonBenet Ramsey in the member section, just went up, and we have another 2 hours on Leaving Neverland with Mike Parziale. So we just uploaded a ton of content to the member section, guys, and I need your support. Okay, $6, you get 1 month, you get access to over 220 shows. I'm uploading a huge Jeffrey Epstein document dump that's going up, huge stack. We don't even know how to get it all up there. Okay, there's so much content in that. You guys are into that stuff. We're going to be drooling when you get this stuff. I got it from this wonderful woman who sent it to me years ago. And I lost track of it, and I just found her recently. She resent it to me. I've been looking for this woman for a long time because she sent me a treasure trove of information. Then what else is going on, too? We're going to have, for Knock Down the House, I'm doing a whole bunch of series of shows about Knock Down the House this week. We're going to have Keenan Korth on the show. We're going to have Amy Villela back on the show. I have Corey Bush coming on the show. Also, too, what was the other thing I was going to tell you? Oh, we have the question and answer segments after the film festival for Knock Down the House. So keep us in mind here. Your donations we support. We always enjoy your donations. OppermanReport.com. Our member section is OppermanReport.com. But also, too, if you want a discount, you email me directly at OppermanReport@gmail.com. And I'll give you 13 months for $65. LasSandinistas.com. Check it out, man. Excellent film.